Hello everyone, thank you for watching our presentation. Before I start, I would like to ask a question. Does our culture affect the way to identify client requirement? Maybe. My name is ALsanoosy. I'm a PhD candidate under the supervision of Dr. Maria Spishkova and Professor James Harland at Aramat University. Our work focuses on the influence of national culture on requirement engineering activities. In this presentation, I would like to present our paper named Exploratory Analysis of Cultural Influences on Requirement Engineering Activities based on Stakeholders Profile. In this paper, we provide a broader examination of the influence of a culture in requirement engineering activities by reporting the analysis of practitioner responses of the identified cultural factor with regard to the industrial profile of the practitioner. I have divided my presentation into 4 sections. First, I would like to give a brief overview about requirement engineering activities and software development methodology. Then I will present our research question followed by research methodology. Lastly, I will discuss our result. Requirement engineering activities is accepted as one of the most key phases of the software development lifecycle. It consists of 5 activities: requirement elicitation, analysis, specification, validation, and management. The goal of these activities is to produce a set of system requirements which as far as possible are complete, consist, relevant, and reflect what the customer actually needs. Requirement engineering is a social technical activity which requires intensive communication with different software stakeholders and understanding the individual culture and behavior. Culture argue that culture has a significant influence on the communication process, and cultural differences might create misunderstanding and conflict among individuals involved in the communication process. As a culture affects the way in which people communicate, requirement engineering activities might be strongly influenced by individual culture, and it cannot be ignored. Successfully applying requirement engineering activities should consider the social and cultural aspect. However, there are a few research works on the influence of the culture in requirement engineering activities. But what does culture mean? One of the most accepted and adopted definitions and models of culture in many types of research and in the software engineering and information system is Hofstede model and definition of culture. Hofstede work has been cited more than 80,000 times. In our work, we adopted Hofstede definition and model of culture. Hofstede defined culture as a collective programming of a mind which distinguishes members of one group from another. This indicates that culture is learned through the society member in a group and is composed of a set of values, assumptions, and beliefs, and that influence the characteristics and the behavior of a group members. We adopted Hofstede model to understand the concept of culture because it is widely adopted in information system studies and cross-cultural studies, and it is widely used to compare culture and understand the influence of culture in different disciplines. As we mentioned earlier, requirement engineering needs close interaction and intensive communication among software stakeholders to identify and document client requirements. In the case when the client and/or requirement engineering practitioner have different cultural background, it is possible that cultural influences might lead to problems in communication. As a result, this can greatly impact on the quality of the identified requirement. The software development methodology can be broadly divided into 2 groups: traditional, or called linear, and agile, or iterative. Independently from the methodology, the core requirement engineering activities should be always performed, but their sequence and embedded into the methodology are different. In the context of waterfall, the core requirement engineering activities are only conducted at the beginning of the software development cycle, which might be called a requirement definition phase or requirement elicitation phase. In the context of agile or iterative, the core requirement engineering activities are not clearly separated. Instead, requirement engineering is carried out iteratively during the whole development process. In the traditional and agile software development process, the requirement engineering activities are conducted differently, where agile process assumes a deeper involvement of the customer within the project direction. But why we focus on requirement engineering activities? Software is developed for human and used by human, and communication is one of the essential issues in all collaborative activities such as requirement engineering process. However, as evidenced in the literature, few studies have been conducted to explore the influence of culture in requirement engineering activities, and therefore more empirical cultural studies are required. Thus, the aim of this work is to address the limitation of the requirement engineering literature by exploring and analyzing the influence of individual culture on requirement engineering activities. To achieve our aim and provide deeper analysis, we formulated the following research question. How do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of adopting traditional agile methodology? And in the second research question, how do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of working with government, private sector? And the last research question, how do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of small, medium, large company size, based on the profile of the practitioners involved in our research. To achieve our research aim, we conducted an empirical study to explore the influence of culture in requirement engineering activities. We adopted mixed method design to gain a comprehensive understanding of the issue through using the strength of both quantitative and qualitative data. The mixed method design is divided into two phases. In the first phase, we conducted two case studies in two different cultures, Saudi Arabia and Australia. We used face-to-face semi-structured interviews to collect the data. In the first phase, 41 interviews were conducted, 18 from Australian practitioners and 23 interviews from Saudi Arabia practitioners. In the second phase, we conducted follow-up interview with the same practitioner in order to consolidate the previously collected data in the phase 1 and collect quantitative data about the dominant of the identified cultural influences. In the second phase, 30 follow-up interviews were conducted, 15 from Australian and 15 from Saudi Arabia. In our study, we selected Saudi Arabia and Australia because of the remarkable difference between them. Our assumption is that comparing Saudi Arabia and Australia would allow us to identify cultural influences in requirement engineering activities because of the huge difference between them. The practitioners were chosen based on the following criteria. First, employed in a Saudi Arabia Australian software company, because the focus of this study is to identify the natural cultural influences from these two countries. Second, employed in a small to large size organization, because we want to cover all types of organization. The third criteria was involving in the requirement engineering activities, because the focus of this study is in requirement engineering activities. The last criteria was the employee should have at least 5 years of experience in requirement engineering activities. Practitioners have less than 5 years of experience might have less experience to deal with a client due to their adjustment to the new work environment, lack of experience, or limited project they may involve in. So their opinion might not be necessarily related to the cultural influences in general. Here is the list of the Australian practitioners involved in our research. In the first phase, 18 Australian practitioners participated, and in the second phase, 15 agreed to the follow-up interview. In general, the practitioner had between 5 to 15 years of experience working in private and government companies covering different types, bank, commerce, and health, and size of companies, as well as several rules that are related to the requirement engineering activities. Here is the list of the Saudi Arabian practitioners involved in our research. In the first phase, 23 Saudi Arabian practitioners participated, and in the second phase, 15 agreed to the follow-up interview. The Saudi Arabian practitioner had between 5 to 25 years of experience working in private and government companies covering different sizes of companies as well as rules related to requirement engineering activities. In any empirical research, sampling size and reaching saturation point are important. Some argue that 6 interviews are enough. Others say 12 to 15 in-depth interviews of a homogeneous group are adequate. However, there is no agreement to the question of how many interviews are enough, as the concept of saturation depends on many factors. In this study, we believe that we achieve saturation through coverage and data saturation. For each country, we selected practitioners based on the 4 factors to achieve coverage and therefore saturation. What requirement engineering activities they follow, client type, government or private, company size, and year of experience. Based on these 4 values, there are 12 possible scenarios. However, not all are applicable. For example, it is less likely to have a government software project assigned to small company size. So, after deleting invalid scenario, we will have 10 possible set. In this research, we cover almost all the possible variation of company size, client types, and requirement changing process that can represent the sample size. We cover almost all the 10 scenarios for the case of Saudi Arabia and Australia. Only one set for Australian is not covered yet. This table is constructed based on the data collected about the work experience and role of practitioner that were presented in the last 2 tables. In the next couple of slides, we would like to present our result with respect to our research questions. The first research question was, how do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of adopting traditional agile methodology? This table summarizes the result of the follow-up response of the Saudi Arabian practitioner and the identified cultural influences within the Saudi Arabian case studies. As it can be seen in this table, 5 cultural influences had more negative impact on the traditional requirement changing process as reported by practitioner. These cultural activities were centralized decision-making, solving conflict by favorism or escalation, punctuality, gender segregation, and supporting avoiding taking risks. The reason Saudi Arabia practitioner responses more negative effect on these 5 cultural influences might be because most practitioners adopted traditional methodology, or the difficulties to deal with or change some of these influences, or the likelihood to have a higher negative effect on the proposed solutions. In this slide, we present the result of the first research question from the responses of the Australian practitioners. This table summarizes the result of the follow-up responses of the Australian practitioner and the identified cultural influences within the Australian culture. The responses of the Australian practitioner, as shown in this table, demonstrate some significant differences within the identified cultural influences in using traditional and/or agile methodologies. As it can be seen in this table, the number of practitioners who believe that flexibility use of requirement engineering practices negatively affect on the traditional methodology was higher than the number of practitioners who use agile methodology. This was expected because traditional methodology offers less flexibility and practitioners need to strictly perform the requirement changing process in a sequence. Further, 2 cultural influences, collaborative decision-making and taking shortcuts, negatively impact on agile methodology. Collaborative decision-making was expected to have a more impact on agile, as agile requires intensive communication, not only at the beginning of requirement changing process, but at each sprint. It was also expected that taking shortcut had more negative impact on agile than traditional methodology because agile is more flexible framework. For the second research question, how do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of working with a government private sector, only one cultural influence had a strong negative impact on requirement changing activities when working with the government sector in Saudi Arabia: manager influence. This could be because manager from the government department wanted the software solution to improve existing solution, help achieve a particular objective or vision, or required a solution that is in compliance with the Saudi government rules and regulations. Responses of the Australian practitioner regarding to the second research question, we found that no significant differences in the effect on the identified cultural influences based on the client types. For the third research question, how do the identified cultural influences differ in the case of a small, medium, large company size? With the Saudi Arabian case study, there were no significant differences between the interviews' responses in regard to the effect of the identified cultural influences in terms of company size. However, 2 interviews working for large companies believed that the resolution of conflict by means of escalation had a positive effect on requirement changing activities. This reason might be that conflicts in the large organization affect many departments. Thus, taking a single decision might resolve the conflict or provide a solution that satisfies all departments. On the other hand, with regard to the third research question, the analysis of the Australian case study showed no significant differences in the impact of the identified cultural influences based on the company size. In conclusion, we have 4 key messages can be derived from this presentation. First, as a requirement engineering comprise social technical activities and require intensive communication to identify user needs, the success of requirement engineering activities does not depend only on the technique or methodology used for software development. It is also dependent on the having an understanding of each stakeholder culture and behavior. Second, we identify a set of cultural influences affecting requirement engineering activities into different cultural contexts. The findings of this empirical study are important toward understanding the influence of the identified cultural influences on requirement engineering activities and those that have a significant effect on requirement engineering practice, and therefore need to be carefully considered. The result of the analysis of the interview responses showed a number of significant differences between the impact of some of the identified cultural influences, such as decision-making and way to solve conflict, in the case of traditional agile methodology. The last key message, we believe that this analysis provides a deeper understanding of the influence of the culture on requirement engineering activities, which could assist requirement engineering practitioners to select the most suitable requirement engineering practices methodology to overcome the negative effect of these cultural influences. Thank you for watching this video till the end. For more questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm very happy to have a discussion through email or face-to-face meeting through Zoom or any video conference software. Thank you very much.